So Pitt's got about 11 days of training camp down. They've got about 7 more by my count. The way they can practice, according to the NCAA rules, they practice 3 days on, 1 day off, and so they kind of, like today will be the 3rd day. You know, they had the scrimmage on Saturday. They were off on Sunday. Then the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday practice. They're off tomorrow. They'll be on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and so on. You know, basically they have about 7 days left of camp, about 11 down, 7 to go before they move into the regular in-game schedule. I'm not going to talk about how this is a big grind right now. I talked about that on Monday, and Pat Narduzzi talked about it yesterday, and the players talked about it yesterday. This is the point in camp when you really have to dig deep. But I wonder about on the outside, all right? So you and I, we've been reading all the interviews or conducting all the interviews and, you know, watching the videos and reading the camp reports and doing all the, you know, all consuming as much information as we possibly can throughout the course of the last 11 practices, stretching back to July 30th, right? We've been absorbing as much as we can, trying to find out about this team, trying to learn about this team, see what we know about this team, see what we can find out about this team, see what we believe about this team. And I guess that just got me to thinking, after all that we've consumed in the last couple of weeks, I guess today's the 13th, so exactly 2 weeks since they started training camp. They started on July 30th. So in the last couple of weeks, we've consumed a lot of content and media about this team. Where do you stand right now? Where's your optimism? Where's your concern? Your level of concern? Not necessarily the specific concerns, although we'll certainly get into that, but we've talked about it a lot. But where's your level of optimism right now? We'll probably have this conversation again in 2 weeks when we're in the middle of game week heading into that Duquesne game. We'll talk about where the level of optimism is after another week of training camp and then the first in-game week of practices. But right now, in the middle of training camp, what's your level of optimism? What's your expectations for this team? Have they risen? Have they fallen, you know, from where they were a month ago or where they were 3 weeks ago or 15 days ago, you know, the day before training camp started? I've seen this sentiment on the message board a decent amount of people's optimism climbing, that they're getting, they're starting to believe in this team. They think this team can win. Boy, if this one thing happens, they'll be good. So where do you stand? What did you think they were going to do? What was your win total prediction 2 or 3 weeks ago? And what is it now? I'll tell you where I'm at with this team, which may or may not have anything to do with reality, because a lot of times in the middle of training camp, it's hard to get a real feel for what you're seeing and what you're hearing and what's real and what's not. You get to a certain point in training camp where you just need the team to go out and hit somebody else and play somebody else and tackle somebody else and try and evade somebody else. You get to a point where it's all just kind of, it's almost navel gazing. You know what I mean? At this point. So even I lose sight of the big picture pretty often during training camp. But I'll tell you where my optimism is, and I want to hear from you about where you're at with this team. Let's see. What did I say? They have 11 practices down. They've got 7 to go. So that's about 18 practices in training camp. They're about 2/3 of the way through after today, I guess. What do we think? What is your optimism level? Has it grown? Has it fallen? What do you think about this team? Let's talk about it here on the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below, Panther-Lair.com. The most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting, Pitt transfers, Pitt everything, all at Panther-Lair.com, the Pitt side of the 24/7 sports network, where we have message boards where you can interact with other Pitt fans all day, every day. Pitt fans are talking about Pitt sports on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, and you can be a part of it as well. Panther-Lair.com. And of course, as we've been promoting right now, you can get the best Pitt coverage for half off. Like half off, 50% off. I can't believe we're giving away the best time of year with training camp for half off, but that's what we're doing. So go check it out at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, our YouTube channel right here, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com, the place to get all of our Pitt video content, these daily morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday. Our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. will be live tonight. Me and Jim Hammett talking with you about all things Pitt sports. Post-game shows, press conferences, interviews, practice highlights, all those things. We've got it right here at YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe. And that way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. All right, when I look at this team, when I look at this schedule, let's start with the schedule and what kind of the expectations are there. Because I guess if we want to talk about, like, where's your optimism at with this team right now, it kind of occurred to me, I think a week or so ago, I was on a podcast, the ACC Nation podcast, and we sort of went game by game. And I somehow talked myself into this team having a legit shot at going like 9-3, right? So, I mean, you start off the season like Duquesne and Central Michigan. Okay, those should be wins, all right? 2-0. West Virginia, down there, it's tough. Throw out the record books and all that kind of thing. But it seems like West Virginia's a bit of a mess. You know, I feel like Rich Rod was really kind of criticizing the team a lot, and it just sort of feels like that group is a year or two away from really coming together and adding more transfers and rebuilding the roster. I'm going to say Pitt goes to Morgantown and gets the win on the road for the first time since the 13-9 game. And so they're 3-0. They come back home. They host Louisville after a week off at Acrisure Stadium. And I'm going to say they drop that game. I don't know if, Louisville's new quarterback is going to be as good as last year's quarterback, but I still think Jeff Brom is really good. I think that's a tough game, and I think Pitt will drop that one. But the next week, they got Boston College coming in. I think they'll win that game. Then they'll go down to Florida State. So it's 4-1 at that point. I think we did this on the podcast last week, too, with Jim. Kind of went game by game. So we won't take too long on this thing. But Florida State, I think, I don't know how much better they're going to be this year than they were a year ago. I think they'll be better, but I'm not sure how much better. So I'm going to say Pitt goes down there and takes care of business and gets a win, and they improve to 5-1, right? Then they go up to Syracuse, and I think they get a win there too to get to 6-1, and everybody's excited. You're 6-1 after 7 games. Your only loss is maybe a close one to Louisville. You're in good shape. You got momentum. You got these 2 wins on the road. You've won 3 in a row. You come back home to host NC State, and guess what happens? You blow it. This is the one where I think they trip up, right? It's a very sort of classic Pitt story, particularly after winning a couple of games on the road. You go away from home, you win a couple of games, you build some momentum, and you come home and blow it. So they'll lose that one, and they'll be at 6-2. But after that, they'll go out to Stanford on the 1st of November. I think they'll win that game. They'll come home and play Notre Dame, and I think they'll lose that one, but I think it'll be almost a feel-good-ish kind of loss where they won't necessarily get blown out. And so they'll be at 7-3, and then you finish up the season with Georgia Tech on the road and Miami at home. And my prediction on those 2 games is that Georgia Tech might not have Haynes King, the quarterback, playing by that point because he plays a very physical style of quarterback and potentially is prone to injury. And then I think they'll wrap it up against Miami at home, and I'm just going to bet on Miami blowing it in the regular season finale, as they've done multiple times against Pitt. When you think back to the times that Pitt has beat Miami recently, 2022, they won down there in the regular season finale. 2017, when Kenny Pickett beat them in his first start, was at home in the regular season finale. In 2014, was down there, and Pitt beat them in the regular season finale. Now, they're not perfect in regular season finales against Miami, but it seems to be a good time to catch the Hurricanes. So I just talked myself rather quickly into a 9-3 record. What the hell? Like, where does all that optimism come from? This is a team where you saw some early over-under lines at 5.5. Maybe it moved to 6.5 or something like that. And I'm talking about 9 wins in the regular season for a team that hasn't won a football game since mid-October of 2024. A team that lost 6 in a row, improved some positions through the transfer portal, but no big, obvious, earth-shattering, seismic, tectonic plate movement transfer additions. Just some solid guys who should fill out some depth. Add some starting spots and improve the depth a little bit. And I'm talking into 9-3 and going to the Sun Bowl or someplace like that with a chance to win 10 games. Where does all that come from? I think it comes from a few places. One, I think it comes from having a healthy Eli Holstein. I think that's a big part of it, because when Pitt had a healthy Eli Holstein, they were pretty good, right? I think they were 7-1 in games when Eli Holstein was healthy for the entire game or most of the game or enough of the game to really count. The Virginia game sort of I mean, he got knocked out of that game. I still think he could have led them back to a win there. Obviously got knocked out of the Louisville game on like the second drive. Didn't play against Clemson or Boston College. So, I mean, ultimately, as a starter, he was 7-3. Or Pitt was 7-3 in games when Eli Holstein started last season. In games when he played pretty much the full game, they were 7-1. And so having him back as a healthy starting quarterback, I think is a good place to start. And you sort of assume that he's going to pick up where he left off and potentially improve on what he did a year ago. Desmond Reed coming back is a big bonus. I think some of these wide receivers are emerging. And when you look at some of the reasons that optimism is rising in training camp, like you knew you had Eli Holstein coming back and he was supposed to be healthy. You knew you had Desmond Reed coming back and he would be, probably even better than he was a year ago. But I think some of the wide receivers have emerged and sort of broken out a little bit. Blue Hicks has had a really good training camp and, seemingly positioned himself as a top 3 receiver on this team. Kenny Johnson looks like he's doing a really good job and having a good camp. And so seeing those guys, with as many question marks as we have about the wide receivers and how they would figure in this year and what kind of impact they would make, seeing those guys have good camps and play well and earn a lot of praise and seemingly really just have good camps. You know what I mean? Yeah, seeing them seem to take a step forward as they evolve in this offense, I think has helped create a lot of optimism. On the other side of the ball, the linebackers, I think, are going to be as good as expected. If anything, the depth in the secondary has only increased with the emergence of guys like Rashawn Murray and Sean Lee at cornerback, and then Josh Gurrier at safety. Kavir Baines-Marquez having a good training camp so far. I'm trying to remember. I meant to mention him in yesterday's training camp report for all the turnovers that he's gotten, but I forgot if I put that in there or not. I'll have to double check. That just occurred to me as I was recording this. And so you had some pretty deep, pretty strong positions that seem to have only gotten stronger with the emergence of a few key guys, and then those big question marks up front. Defensive end and offensive line. I mean, those were the biggest question marks. If you talk about reasons you were concerned about this team, those were probably some of the biggest. Those were right at the top. And so many if-then statements about this team's success in 2025 start with if the offensive line, then, and it's good or bad. If the offensive line can stay healthy and or has recruited good depth, then they should be able to be pretty good. If the offensive line can't stay healthy, if the depth's not as good as it's supposed to be, then they're probably going to struggle. So much of it comes down to that group. And there was a point probably last week where it felt like optimism was growing a little bit with the offensive line as different guys were emerging and the top group seemed to be playing well. You go through the weekend, you go through the scrimmage, maybe you start hearing some things that maybe the offensive line isn't quite as far along as it needs to be. And I asked Pat Narduzzi about it yesterday. I asked him about the last 2 days, actually. I asked about the progress of the offensive line on Monday, and then I asked yesterday about some specific things with the offensive line. And Narduzzi seems really confident in the offensive tackles. Ryan Baer and Giovanni Cooley on the right side, Kendall Stanley and Jeff Percy on the left side. Said he feels like they have 4 tackles they can win championships with, which that's high praise. I mean, particularly when you're talking about Baer coming back after moving back and forth between right tackle and left tackle, and by his own admission, not having a great season last year. You're talking about Percy, who has started 3 games. He's played about 400 snaps at Michigan, but he really only made 3 starts. Kendall Stanley has 1 year of starting experience under his belt at Charlotte, playing right tackle, and he'll now play left tackle. And Cooley has never been on the field. So you're talking about 4 guys that I like them. They all seem like nice guys, but there's not exactly a lot in their resumes that leads you to believe they can, as Pat Narduzzi said, win championships for you. But he seems confident, and certainly confident enough to say that. And perhaps the most important part is that he said he feels like they have 4 tackles, whereas last year, as Jeremy Darveau, the offensive line coach, told me, they felt like maybe they had 2. So that's an improvement right there, because if you run into that injury issue that inevitably always comes up, now maybe you've got a little bit more insurance because you've got some guys who can play. You've got some depth at those tackle spots that maybe you didn't have a year ago. But then at the guard spots, it's sort of the same, although it doesn't feel like they've got as much depth at guard right now. I mean, they've got Keith Gouvet and BJ Williams, and Narduzzi said that when those guys are out there, they feel pretty good about the offensive line. Obviously, they really like Lyndon Cooper as well. But I feel like the depth behind the guards and the center, whether it's Ryan Coretta, Isaiah Montgomery, Jackson Brown, Montgomery and Brown were both some of those guys who were called on to start last year in the midst of all the offensive line chaos, and they didn't do all that great. They both started at tackle last year. They're both playing guard now. And so, I don't know if that depth looks all that strong right now. Maybe Montgomery and Brown will be really good, and Coretta is going to be a really good backup center. Maybe. I don't know. We just haven't seen anything positive from those. We haven't seen much from those guys at all, and what we did see last year wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement. And so I think some of those questions are still there, and so much of this season still hinges on how well that offensive line can play. And unfortunately, we're really not going to have a clear sense of that until the season starts. And even more unfortunately, we're not going to have a clearest sense of that until they get to the end of the season. You find out how healthy they were able to survive the 2025 season. If they could get through it without losing too many guys or too many starters or too many snaps to injury over the course of the year. And so that tempers the optimism a little bit. And it's tempered a little bit more by the fact that maybe even that starting five, when they've been together, haven't been playing at the highest level. Now, Narduzzi chalks some of that up to lack of cohesion. They're moving guys around. This guy gets hurt, so they got to move this guy here or move him there. Oh, the backup center got hurt, so this guy's got to slide in there, and that kind of jumbles things up a bit. And that's fine, but you need to find your five and stick to it. And you need to find your 6 and your 7 and your 8 and stick to it, and your 9 and your 10, and really lock in that 2 deep here over the next week and a half of practice. And I think once they get past Saturday's scrimmage, they'll make some sort of finalized decisions and really stick to that throughout next week's practices and then going into game week after that. But they need that group to lock in. And I talked about this on Monday, that this is one of the big storylines for this week of camp, that the offensive line needs to come together and needs to gel and needs to have some cohesion. I think when we were hearing some good things about the offensive line last week, and we were hearing about the receivers making plays, and we were hearing about all this depth in the back seven on defense, and Eli Holstein's still upright and all that stuff, that's when my optimism really started to grow. And we talked about it on the podcast with Jim last week. And I talked about it on that ACC Nation podcast when we would go through the schedule and I could talk myself into 9 wins. But it's not a finished product. And there's still quite a bit of work for this group to do. And as such, I'm tempering it a little bit. I'm probably dropping back down to 8-4. I'm not going to sit here and predict 7-5 because that's just a bummer. And I know you want honest, hard-hitting journalism here, not dictated by whether or not it's a bummer. But, I mean, what's the fun in sitting here and predicting 7-5? I'm going to say that this is a team that should be capable of winning 9 or 10 games, but they're going to stub their toe once or twice, like the NC State game that I'm predicting a loss, and they might do it another time. And then that drops you down to about 8 wins. And so that's probably where I'm settling in right now. Not sure where that toe stub will come. Probably Boston College, since Narduzzi's like 1-3 against Boston College since he got to Pitt. But there'll be another toe stub is what I'm predicting right now, because this offensive line needs to come together. Now, a week from now, or even coming out of Saturday's scrimmage, we might hear all these great things about the offensive line, and I'll be back up to 9 wins. But for now, I'm taking the under on 8.5. No one set the line at 8.5, but if it was set at 8.5, I'd be taking the under on it. So where are you at with your optimism right now? We're not locking into your predictions. Whatever record you say you think right now is going to be the one that'll definitely, you're stuck with all season. But where are you with your predictions? Where are you with your optimism about this team? With everything you've read and seen and heard coming out of training camp so far, what's your level of optimism? Where are you at? All right. Don't forget, we'll be talking about this tonight on the live show right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. 8:30 p.m. We'll be live with me, Jim Hammett, and you, talking about all things Pitt sports. It should be fun. It always is. We take your comments and questions, and we have a little conversation. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and then head over to Panther-Lair.com, the Pitt site on the 24/7 Sports Network, to get all of the Pitt video content. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you've had a great week so far. Enjoy your Wednesday. We'll catch up with you tonight for the live show, and again tomorrow morning for the Morning Pitt right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.